And welcome to Washington Journal.
Thank you, Bill.
Let's start with, first of all, the Fed's move yesterday, raising that interest rate to try to help battle inflation. What did you think about the move and the effort so far by the Biden administration to fight inflation?
First of all, the Fed did what they had to do. In fact, there are a lot of economists saying it needed to be even higher. The rule of thumb is that the Fed rate's got to be at least that of the inflation rate to begin to suppress the inflationary spiral. But as far as the Biden administration, they caused this. I mean, what is the definition of inflation? It is too many dollars chasing too few goods. The lockdown left suppressed productivity for 2 years. This administration comes in, spends trillions of dollars we don't have, prints those dollars, and releases them into the economy. Well, of course you're going to have a massive inflation. That's the very definition of inflation. It's not complicated.
Is that still happening by the administration? And do you see the potential for that happening with their proposed budget for 2023?
Well, it all depends. If they're able to get their so-called Build Back Better agenda through, that's trillions of dollars of additional money that we don't have that has to be printed that will inflate the economy. Right now, M2's coming down. Interest rates are going up. But we've got to hold the line on spending, and it's all caused by the spending. I mean, if you want to know the entire budget in 3 numbers, it's pretty simple. 28, 76, and 89. 28, 76, 89. 28% is the combined growth of population and inflation over the last 10 years. 28%. 76% is the increase in federal revenues in the same period. Federal revenues are growing more than twice, approaching 3 times what inflation and population combined have grown. And that's after the Republican tax cuts a few years ago. 89 is the problem. That's percent increase in spending in the same period. To borrow from the old Clinton phrase, it's the spending stupid.
Obviously, the price of gas and the prices in general are affecting the entire country. Specifically, though, for your congressional district and the 4th District there in California, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your constituents?
I'll tell you what I saw when I went to the airport on Monday. Gas, $6.95 a gallon at the airport, ARCO. That's for regular. That's quite a bit higher than the rest of the country, but California has imposed so many additional green laws that's the price that we're paying. But the bottom line is this can't continue. It's crushing families, and it's unnecessary. This was not some mysterious act of God that was visited upon our nation. These were specific acts of government. This was bad public policy. And the good news is we can change that the moment we summon the political will.
I want to ask you about the congressional efforts after the shootings in Buffalo, the mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas. The House passed a bill, the Protecting Our Children's Act. The Senate reportedly is working on a deal, some of which will include, that Senate bipartisan proposal will include funding for states to implement crisis intervention orders. It would close the so-called boyfriend loophole on domestic abuse. It would fund school-based mental health services and community health clinics, fund school safety resources, clarify rules on who needs to register as a licensed gun dealer, and enhance background checks for under 21 gun buyers. Some of the reporting on that bill, what are your thoughts? Is that something that sounds like you could support?
Well, we can go into each of the specific details, but overall, we have now more than 50 years of experience with gun control laws in this country. They are very effective at disarming law-abiding citizens. They are very ineffective at disarming criminals and madmen and terrorists. They create an environment where law-abiding citizens are defenseless and the gunman is king. That's been the case in all of these so-called gun-free zones, including Uvalde. But the good news is we also know what works. Putting gun predators in jail until they're old and gray works. Executing murderers works. Identifying the dangerously mentally ill and confining them to mental institutions where we can treat them works. And law-abiding citizens who can shoot back works. The day after Uvalde, there was an incident in Charleston, West Virginia. A gunman with an AR-15 style assault weapon fired into a graduation party. There was a woman there with a concealed weapon who shot him dead on the spot. We didn't hear about that mass shooting because there wasn't a mass shooting, because there was an honest citizen with a gun who was able to stop it before it started.
Congressman Tom McClintock is with us up till about 8:30 Eastern, so we welcome your calls, your comments. 202-748-8001 is the line for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and for independents and others, 202-748-8002. Around the time of the passage of that bill, Congressman, in the House version, the headline from Cleveland.com, House Democrats advance gun control legislation over objections from Republicans led by Ohio's Jim Jordan. But you were quoted in that saying, nobody questions the common sense of having an armed guard at a bank, but leftists somehow cannot see the common sense of having an armed guard at school. So does that mean you're in favor of hardening schools and arming teachers?
A teacher who has a concealed weapons permit, who's gone through the training, what is the purpose of a concealed weapons permit? It's self-defense. Why shouldn't that teacher, if they want to, be allowed to use that concealed weapons permit to defend the students in their own classroom, if they want to? And why in the world don't we put an armed guard at every school the way we put an armed guard at every bank, every shopping mall? We think nothing of it when we see an armed guard at a shopping mall. They're there to protect merchandise. Why don't we use the same resolve and force to protect our children? This is inconceivable to me.
Relatively new phenomenon of having school teachers armed. What data do we have to show that in those locations, those states or localities, that indeed that shootings at those schools have gone down?
I haven't seen data on that particular point. What I have seen is data on the overall incidence of gun violence in those communities that have concealed weapons permits, and it's generally much lower in the areas where you have armed citizens. Not only because they can shoot back, but because criminals know they can shoot back. The Buffalo shooter, in his twisted manifesto, went into this in great detail. He was specifically looking for so-called gun-free zones. You know, you look at Uvalde. It's illegal, even if you have a concealed weapons permit, illegal to take a gun onto the campus. Every administrator obeyed that law. Every teacher obeyed that law. Every janitor obeyed that law. The only person who didn't was the gunman. And there are 19 children dead as a result.
On that Buffalo shooter in the manifesto you mentioned, that was published at the time of that horrible that shooting. So we had no way of knowing what that manifesto is.
No, but we know what was going through that twisted mind. And he was reasoning this through. If you're in a gun-free zone, people aren't going to shoot back. That's the place to do a mass shooting.
So do you think in the Senate legislation that the efforts to identify potential mental problems or emotional problems with people under the age of 18, people 18 and under, the shooter in Buffalo, the one in Uvalde, Texas, both 18 or 19 years old, both having some trouble or issue that had not been identified. Do you think that we should be able to find ways to identify those?
We had ways. We had ways to identify those. For years, when we identified somebody who was a danger to themselves or to others, regardless of their age, they shouldn't have any access to firearms. They also shouldn't have access to any other kind of weapon. They shouldn't have access to people where they can hurt themselves or hurt others. And we had a process that respected all of our due process rights. When we encountered someone like that, we could commit them, confine them, and get them the help they needed. We need to get back to that process. You know, I checked just for California. If you compare the number of individuals, dangerous mentally ill individuals confined in our mental hospitals today, compared to 1960, and then adjust for inflation, we should have, just in the state of California, about 100,000 dangerously mentally ill in mental institutions today where they can be treated. But we don't have them there. They're out on the streets.
What's happened to that process?
It's been completely corrupted by the left. I mean, look at it. We used to prosecute gun criminals to the fullest extent of the law. We put them in jail until they were old and gray. That worked. The left stopped that. Now leftist DAs refuse to prosecute. The first thing they do is plea bargain down the gun charges. I mean, look at Hunter Biden. He committed 2 gun felonies when he purchased a .38 revolver. The first is you're not allowed to do that if you're a drug addict. He was an admitted drug addict. And then he lied on the form, which is a second felony. Is he being, and these facts aren't in dispute. Is he being prosecuted? What kind of message does that send? And what does that tell us about our own resolve to protect our citizens from violence?